Thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Cherie Scott, and I am so thrilled to be here tonight and be the host of Talking Food in Maine, Intimate Conversation, our series. We are third into the series with our esteemed guest today, Cathy Gunst, and we're so excited to have her here. We had a great time at dinner tonight, and we're ready to get right into it. Dig real deep. And before we get started, and I call Cathy out, I do want to tell you a funny story. Doing some prep and research, for the interview tonight, I said to Cathy, hey, Cathy, can I come out with you to Boston and kind of shadow you, while you're on the radio show, and just kind of do a day in the life of Cathy Gunst and see what she's like on air, which, by the way, she's absolutely amazing. But the funny thing is, I had to drive to South Berwick to get to her house, and she said to me, you know what, Cherie, we're going to have about a 2-hour ride to Boston, depending on the traffic. Well, we got there an hour and 30. She drives like a New Yorker, just so you know. But all jokes aside, we had the best chat, and it ended up being my telling her about my whole life, because Cathy had just lost her voice, and she had to go on air in a couple hours. And so I told her, I said, listen, you don't need to entertain me. Just hang out. Don't regale me with any stories. I said, I'll just chill out. And I ended up telling her so much about myself, and we found out we had so much in common. But tonight, I get to be in the driver's seat, and she gets to share. So we're very excited for her to be here tonight and join us. And without further ado, let's give Cathy the warmest round of applause. Come on out, Cathy. There she is. Hi. Thank you. Mm-hmm. Welcome.
Thank you.
All right, Cathy, take a seat. Get comfortable.
Look at this.
Is this wonderful?
I love your theater, yeah.
Thank you for joining us.
Thanks
Let's
for
get some
having
water.
me.
Yeah.
We're going to live it up here. I heard Melissa Kelly ask for champagne.
We did have Prosecco from Melissa Kelly. But we also had some nitro for her from Capacity because she had a tough flight getting here.
I'm a cheap date,
You are. But, we appreciate that. So how are you feeling?
I feel great.
Awesome.
I love this little town, and I'm so thrilled to be here.
We're very excited to have you here today. And I have to tell you, talking about your books tonight, I was just like, we have to start with the most amazing book that you've written. I think it's probably some of your finest work. Rage Baking.
Rage Baking.
Yeah.
This is,
So let's show them our wonderful, look at that beautiful kitchen of yours. All the magic. Absolutely. Yes. So there's Rage Baking.
Yes, there it is, and here it is. This is a somewhat of a fake out because this is not the real book. It won't be out till February 4th, but I'll tell you a little bit about this. This is my 16th book. I've been doing this for a long time, and in the last year, I started to feel that I wanted to do something more. I am a very opinionated human being. I am very outspoken. I have been known to rile up a dinner party or two. And I was paying attention to what's going on in this country. And I was upset.
Why were you upset, Cathy? Why were you so enraged that you had to write a book about rage baking?
How long do we have?
So we have all the time in the world. But before we get into that, tell me a little bit about Catherine Alford, which most folks won't know here. You co-authored the book with Catherine, and Catherine, until recently, was at the Food Network for almost 20 years.
Yep, she was a vice president of Culinary at the Food Network. We've been friends for about a decade. And actually, before I bring her into it, I have to tell you how it started.
Yes,
because it's kind of funny when she entered the situation. So it was during the Kavanaugh hearings. I feel things in a big way, but that week I was glued to my television. I was glued to my radio, and I listened to everything Dr. Blasey Ford had to say, and I listened as the men of the United States Senate grilled her, and I listened to the woman that the Republicans hired to grill her said, and I was so out of sorts. I almost didn't recognize myself because my upsetness was at a brand new level. And the things that I normally do to calm myself down, I cook, but I almost always cook savory food. I'm a big swimmer. I go and do laps and try to exhaust my mind. And I take long walks, and nothing worked.
Wow.
Nothing. I became really clear. For me, I felt watching this, I mean, I'm old, I remembered Anita Hill, I remembered those trials, I remember a lot. I've been around for a while, and I watched that and I thought, how can this be 2019? How can this be now? How can women still not be listened to? You guys thought we were going to talk about cream sauces, right? Just wait, yeah. We might get to that too. And I became really angry, rageful, and one night, midway through that week, I thought, I'm going to bake something. And I'm a good baker. I've written a lot of cookbooks, but I don't consider myself a baker. And that night, I made a batch of cookies, chocolate chip tahini, if I recall. I made a pie. It was fall. I think it was an apple pear galette. And I then made a chocolate cake in one night. No one's birthday, no one's celebration. It was me trying to work something out. And midway through the pie crust, I could feel my heart regulating.
Like you felt sedated?
Not sedated, oh no. I felt my feet were back on earth.
Interesting.
So it was different than being sedated. It was more of a feeling of, okay, almost like being back in my body. Mm-hmm. The next day, the same thing happened. And the next. I couldn't stop. I'd listen to NPR all day. I'd turn on the TV occasionally. I'd watch this. I'd listen to it. And I just kept baking. And let me just say that the UPS guy really likes me.
I was going to say, well,
anyone that rang the doorbell, I'm like, hi, you want a cake? Hi, you want a pie? I mean, this was also very odd and very unlike me. I had no interest in eating this. It wasn't about, I need sugar. It was, in retrospect, because I certainly did not know what I was doing when I was doing it, I think that baking is so much about rules. It's a science. And if you get your butter at room temperature, and if you measure your flour properly, and if you toast the nuts first, you will get a result that is predictable. And I think I felt that the whole world was out of control and that there were no rules anymore. Not the rules that I knew, that I grew up with, and sort of the rules that I was taught as a child. I felt that morality was eroding. It's a big statement, I know, but I did feel like that. So I'm baking, and I'm giving away cakes and pies. And then there we were, the very last day, with our senator about to make a really huge decision. And if there's anyone here that works for Susan Collins' office, I apologize, because I inundated her office with several phone calls a day, and they got a little fiery.
Do you think you should have sent the cakes?
I think that might have worked better. It's a really good point.
But no, I understand that.
I really trusted her. I really believed it when she said that she was going to listen to all the testimony and wait before she made her decision. And well, let's just say that there's a recipe in Rage Baking called the Wild Maine Blueberry Supreme Court Crumble.
That's hilarious.
I was extraordinarily upset with her behavior, and I felt that she turned her back on the people of Maine, and in particular the women of Maine, and I was devastated. So I baked and baked and baked, and about a year ago I had to have a small surgery, and I was driving to the hospital. I don't remember this, but this is what Catherine tells me. I started posting all these photographs, hashtag Rage Baking, Rage Bakers, and I started hearing from a lot of people, particularly women, who are like, what a great idea, I'm doing the same thing, or this is so much better than sitting on the couch crying. And I thought, I've struck a chord. And Catherine called while we were driving to the hospital in Boston, and she started talking, and she goes, you know what, we should do a book. And I go, what do you mean a book? And she goes, Rage Baking. And I said, do you think it could be a book? She's like, why couldn't it be a book? And the idea for this to be a book happened on what would normally would be a very nerve-wracking bummer drive to a hospital, right, where you know you're going to go through some stuff. And there's a photograph that I took of myself in the Johnny, in the little pre-op cubicle that they put you in, and I am beaming. I am so excited that I want to write this book. This is everything that I'm passionate about. It's right, food and spreading the message.
And activism.
And activism, yeah, and women and sharing and political beliefs, and this is what it is.
And it got you through that surgery, and you got out of there, and you said, all right, how are you going to get this book together? So what did you do? Did you just get together and write a book, or did you make a list of people you wanted to talk to?
Well, we weren't even clear that what we were going to do. I mean, Catherine's an incredible baker and an incredible cook, and she's got 40 years in the food business, and I'd got 40 years in the food business. And we started talking, and we realized that we wanted to involve other women in this book. So we started making a list, and there was like the dream list, and then, you know, Michelle Obama, and a lot of dreamers. She did not come through. But we got a lot of incredible women to give us their favorite recipes, or recipes that things that they like to bake when they're upset, when they feel, you know, we asked people, when we say the word rage, and then we say the word baking, what comes to mind? And we got everything from some really interesting cookies to incredible breads, you know, pounding dough and rolling pie crust. And then we thought, and I mean, I'm a writer and I'm a reader and I love books, and I thought, what if we had essays, and what if we asked different women and activists and musicians and Hollywood producers to write essays for us? And then I interviewed a bunch of women, so the book became a collective. Mm-hmm. The subtitle is The Transformative Power of Flour, Fury, and Women's Voices, because there are over 40 women that contributed to the book.
It's an incredible list. I mean, you've got Annie DeFranco and Dara Goldstein and Ruth Reichel. I mean, you've just got an incredible
we were really
list
lucky.
Of talent there. So.
The most interesting thing was that Ruth Reichel, I think, was the very first. I've met her several times, and I just sent out this email, and I'm like, hey, Ruth, we're doing a book called Rage Baking, and everyone we sent it to, within minutes, wrote back, hell yes. And I'm like, wow, it was way easier than I thought we were going to have to like pull teeth and, you know, really cajole people. And when they heard what it was about and because more and more, I think, particularly for a lot of food writers, I've been noticing there are a lot of recently collectives coming out, mm-hmm, where a community comes together to create a book, as opposed to it just being one person's book and their repertoire. And I don't know if it's a trend. I certainly didn't know about it when I started this. It just felt like it made sense to include other women, and it just took off.
And I love some of the names on there, like impeachment upside down cake. That was very funny. And the other one I loved was not taking any more sheet cake. I love that. I thought that was hilarious. # Rage Bakers.
And the old childhood favorite of mine from the 50s, Pigs in a Blanket, takes on a whole new meaning when you dedicate it to the men of the Alabama Senate. But they're not all clever and funny, but also there's I'm Not Your Honey cupcakes.
Yes, and that's another one that I can't say on the interview, but I thought that was hilarious. P.S. I love you. You'll see it when you pre-order the book and you kind of check it out in person in February. So tell me why you picked the date for the release.
February of 2020 is Women's History Month. Mm-hmm. It is also 100 years anniversary of a women's right to vote. And it also happens to be several months before a rather important national election. So we really wanted to get it out well before the election and get people fired up. Part of the proceeds is going to Emily's List. And I had always heard about Emily's List.
Can you tell us who or what Emily is? I mean, some people might not
exactly.
know.
I thought so Emily's List has a connection to the state of Maine. I thought it was a person. What they do is they raise money for women candidates, whether it's on a uber local race or Hillary Clinton, right up to women running for president. Emily stands for Early Money is Like Yeast. And the woman who started it was a baker in Maine. So when we found out about that, it was like ding, 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 like this is just perfect. So we're giving them part of the proceeds of the book.
That's awesome, because I was doing some research on Emily's List, and in 1985, when it was created, there were only 24 women in Congress.
Correct.
And today, as of November 2019, there's 101 women in Congress.
And they have,
that makes a big difference.
when they first started, I believe they were only supporting, there were only about like 75 women that came to them asking for help. And I can't remember the statistic, but it's over 20,000 women that they're helping, again, on every level, from the smallest local thing to president.
Would you like to read us a little excerpt out of your book?
Sure. A little, yeah.
I mean, we've got a beautiful stage. We might as well have a staged reading, right? Let's have Kathy read us a little
Okay,
bit.
this is a little bit, this is towards the very end of the introduction, which explains a lot of what I just told you about, something in my mouth, about how the book came to be. Anyway, this is towards the end. The news keeps coming at us like an unrelenting tornado. There's no time to truly absorb these stories, these outrages. We are like sponges that are already fully soaked. How are we to process the way these men are trying to turn back the clock, take away women's right to choose, tell us what we can and can't do with our own bodies? Let me be clear, this is not a book telling women that if they get back into the kitchen and start baking, their rage will be sedated and all will be well. Far from it. This is a book about women's voices, women's recipes, women in community with one another. Little glimpse.
Love it.
Thank you.
And what I love most about, what I felt like I could take away from the book was, yes, the recipes were beautiful and funny and poignant, but I love that you put action into it. So it's like you're mad, you're gonna get glad, because in the middle of all that, you're gonna go and bake. But then you're gonna get inspired by reading these words from the book by all these different artists and illustrators and activists and musicians who have written these beautiful essays. And then somehow you're gonna channel that and go out there and you're gonna do your bit. Because you're going to feel like you need to be heard.
Well,
and you're going to get inspired.
That's the goal.
And I love that. I love that there was an end for that rage. You kind of channeled it creatively, and here we are.
And not to be mistaken, this is also very much a cookbook. There are, 50 really, really good baking. It's a friend's birthday on Sunday, and they asked me to bring dessert, and I've spent like 3 days going, this. So
I loved Ruth Reichel's recipe for oatmeal cookies. I could not believe that the last editor of Gourmet Magazine sent in a recipe with 7 ingredients.
I think it's 6 ingredients, yeah.
Oh, if you count salt, it was 7. But I was like, wow, that's amazing. I was like, because they usually tell you in these magazines, keep it to about 5 ingredients. You don't want to overwhelm the reader. And I think she sent you, and I think you gave me one of those oatmeal cookies when I left.
I think I did, because they're so easy to make. So yeah,
awesome.
It ranges from that to a triple chocolate cake with raspberry that you can rage on for 2 days.
Love it. So, what I also loved about this book, besides the recipes, was this gorgeous black and white photography that you opened each chapter with. Where did you find all the photos? And tell us a little bit about those photos.
Okay, so this is really great. My mother-in-law, Nancy Rudolph, who we lost about 4 or 5 years ago, was a photojournalist. She did beautiful photography, and she has a body of work that's enormous. And we have been working with an archivist and going through it because she was in Italy during the war. She documented everything. She lived in New York City. And in the back of my head, I had this memory that there was a box of photos with the label Women's Marches. And we were looking through her stuff, and I couldn't find it. And I thought, it's okay. We're going to have a photographer take beautiful color photos of the food. And at the last minute, there it was, the box, Women's Marches. And when you see the book, the very first image is of a 1961 Women's March in front of the White House. And they're in the pouring rain, and all the women are wearing fur coats and high heels. And they're carrying white balloons, and it says, "Ban the bomb." And you look at this photo, and it's just so powerful. It's from another time and another place. And then I found a stack of photos, all black and white, because she primarily worked in black and white, of the Women's March in Washington for 1983. I think it was called the Pentagon March. And all these kind of hippie chicks and all these women out there with kids. So what we did was we took the black and white photo as the chapter opener, and then you turn the page and there's color photos of all the women that contributed to that chapter, and then you get into the gorgeous food porn, as they call it. I don't even like that term.
Nom,
right,
that.
just, beautiful photographs of baked goods.
And what a lovely way of including her work now and her legacy, of course, because she's gone into something that now will pass down generations in your family and various women.
Absolutely. Sorry, microphone. I get very touched by this. And she was a woman who really struggled to be recognized in her life. She was so talented, but she was not a great businesswoman. And I like to think that she would be so proud to be part of this. But also, I just hope that people see her work and wow, this is beautiful. So
I was very touched by it, and then I saw the little insert in there that I saw the last name. I said, "Oh my God, that's your mother-in-law."
That's John's mom. Yeah,
that's amazing.
Yeah. So I hope she's watching.
Oh, I'm sure she's very, very proud. So let's segue a little bit about.
Oh my goodness.
Your childhood.
My childhood.
Your
wow,
mom.
We're really going to get into it. Can I lie down?
Yes, you can lie down.
Okay.
I will turn on some very soothing music, right,
Look at
Damon?
my
We got
mom.
it. Okay.
Yeah, that's my mom.
But yeah, that's you and your mom.
That's baby Kathy.
So sweet. So tell us a little bit about your childhood. There's your mom and dad. Where did you grow up? And I see a very beautiful picture of your mom in the kitchen, and she looks like she's cooking with fresh ingredients. It's nothing out of a can. Or
bullshit. Am I allowed to say that? My mom really did not like cooking at all. She was a 1960s housewife. She had 3 kids. She did not enjoy it. It was all about, let's eat, let's get it cleaned up so I can be over with this. And I never grew up with a table where we would sit for hours and talk. And it was really, the more I think about it at this point in my life, I'm sort of shocked by it. I understand.
Why are you shocked by it?
Because it's almost like I had a rebellion against that with the path that my life took. Food was, I always loved to eat, always. I mean, there's so many, hopefully you didn't get your hands on any of them, but there's so many childhood pictures of me, grabbing food off a plate and snacking on things. But I never learned as a child that food was pleasure, and that food and cooking could be relaxing and rewarding and create community and create family, and she just didn't like it.
She didn't embrace it like you did.
Photo, my dad was a textile salesman. We grew up right outside of New York City in Westchester County, and that was actually a photo for the New York Times Magazine about young career families. And that's her in her Bermuda shorts pretending to cook.
Oh, so that was staged. I think that was a bit of prescience there, a little foreshadowing about what was to come.
I can say that she really didn't enjoy it.
But you also think about how much harder it was then. I think in many ways it's gotten easier for us because we have things broken down for us. We can have a sauce pre-made. You really had to whip up the sauce from scratch, and I don't know. I just think my mom had it harder too. Like she wanted to. It was functional. She wanted us in and out, fed, and
So
move
for you
on.
too.
Yeah, so I was never allowed in her kitchen. Our kitchen was the size of a shoebox, really. We were in Mumbai. It was very tiny. And so my being in there was really more of a hazard, because I was in her way and I was eating all the prep before she could cook it, and it drove her nuts. So I think in many ways, I think our moms had it a little harder than we did.
Well, I think there was a different attitude about food then, and it certainly didn't, there would never have been an event like this. There would never have been a focus in a theater on food. It was just, there weren't rock stars in food and all the things that have happened in the past. I mean, I've been a food journalist for, over 40 years, and to see how it's changed. I remember when we first moved to Maine, we would go to a party or we'd meet people, and John, my husband, who's somewhere out there, was working for National Public Radio, and we would go to a party and he'd say, "Oh, I'm a freelancer for NPR," and they're like, "Oh, wow, tell us everything." And then they'd say, "What do you do?" And I'd say, "I'm a food writer," and they're like, "Oh, doesn't that get boring?" I mean, that was the attitude in the early 80s, like that's all. I remember this one woman saying to me, "That's all you write about? Isn't that tedious?" And I remember being so insecure that I remember that statement to today. I mean, I know exactly who said it to me. I remember what she was wearing. I remember what I was wearing. And it's like, yeah, take that, Rach Baker.
There you go. So let's segue back a little, because
Okay,
I want to kind of
Notice
follow.
I skipped over that, Dr. Freud.
You did. But I do think it's important for us to understand your journey from Manhattan to Maine. So you grew up in Westchester.
Yep.
Did you go to culinary school? Did you go to college when you graduated? Like, what was your path? Did you know, okay, I love to eat. So
No.
what did you do?
No, it's so haphazard. I went to college, and I did not like it. There were 14 women from my graduating class from my high school who went to this college with me. It was called Kirkland College. It was the sister school to Hamilton in upstate New York. And I got there and I thought, yes, really? All right. I expected it to be, I got there too late. I think it was a really interesting school when it first started. And I thought, I'm not going to stay here. There's no sunshine in upstate New York.
So where did you go?
So I came back and I thought, what am I going to do? I knew I wanted to finish my education, but I knew I needed a break. So I got this idea that I would go to cooking school. Why did I get this idea? Because this is kind of embarrassing. I fell in love with this guy, freshman year of college, and he lived off campus, and he would cook for me. And it was like, wow. I mean, this guy really knew how to cook. And it turned out, this was not my husband, it turned out that his mother had been to the Cordon Bleu in London. And I thought, that's what I'm going to do. I want to go to London. I couldn't go to Paris. My French I wasn't fluent.
Yeah.
And I applied to go to the Cordon Bleu in London. And I got in and I went, and it was a 3 or 4 month program, and I learned all the basics. I learned, how to make pastry. I learned how to make classic French sauces. Mm-hmm. I learned the kind of food that we mostly don't eat. But I like to think of it like art, that you can't experiment until you learn the basics.
The form.
And I did, and I learned the basics. And I loved living in London, and I loved the adventure of it all. And that is really what started it. And when I came back, I finished my BA at the New School in New York, but I started working full-time at a travel magazine in the city.
Now, why travel? You went to school for food, but how did you get into the travel?
Because I got a job.
Okay.
I knew that I didn't want to be on a campus, and I knew I would finish, but I knew I wasn't going to do it the normal way. And I wanted to work. I just wanted to work, and I knew about this magazine. It was called Diversion Magazine. It's a travel and arts magazine for physicians, and it was very successful because it was filled with pharmaceutical advertising.
I bet. But now you got a lucky break.
I did.
Tell us about your lucky break and how you got into food writing, because the gods were definitely shining on you.
So, I was 19 years old. I thought I knew everything about everything. And I got to Diversion the first day of work, and I'm expecting, an office with a view, and I didn't even know what I was going to do. Yeah. And I was the receptionist, and I had to it was past the time where you plug the things in, but I had to answer the calls, please hold, that's what I did. And every day I would go into a bathroom stall and cry, and I'd think, I hate this, I'm not gonna do this. And I told myself I was gonna do it for like 3 or 4 months, and if nothing changed, I would quit. And I got the guts up to go in, the editor-in-chief, and I went in to see him one day towards the end of the workday, and I said, Steve, I really want to write. I really want to learn how to edit. And he goes, what do you know? And I felt like going, everything, I was 19. And I said, what do you mean, what do I know? And he goes, well, are you an expert in anything? And I'm like, well, I just went to cooking school. Write about food. And I thought, that's not writing. That's not real writing. And I said, well, what do you want me to write about? He goes, you tell me, come up with 6 ideas. And this was the 80s, and it was at the start of sort of the gourmet food world. And I thought, I'm going to do an article about the fact that I grew up with Gulden's mustard, and now I can go into a store in New York City, and there's 40 different mustards from around the world. Like, why is this happening? What does it mean? Are these mustards better than Gulden's? Will it improve people's cooking? So he gave me a chance, and I wrote the article, and honestly, I was hooked. I think slowly I started to realize that food is so much more than food, that food is about religion, anthropology, sociology, it's about communities, it's about activism, it's about family, it's about everything. It's the one thing that all society shares, that all humans share. Maybe some of us knit, or some of us like cars, or some of us are religious, or some of us are activists, but we all eat. And I started to understand the depth, the possibilities of writing about food as becoming something about writing about so much more.
Right.
So I stayed there for a few years and had some incredible opportunities.
So how did you land up with an amazing role as the culinary editor at Food and Wine at 24 years old? How did you get that gig?
I think I was younger, actually.
Were you really?
I don't know. I'm glad. You probably know my life better than I do at this point.
I do.
This woman does really good homework. So when I was at Diversion, one of the wonderful things, aside from being able to write, was that I was able to travel. And I was fortunate enough to take a trip to Bologna, Italy with Marcella Hazan.
Isn't she like the Julia Child of
She sure
Italian
is.
cooking?
She sure was. I mean, her cookbooks are just so perfect and beautiful. And this was fairly towards the beginning of her career, and she did a cooking school in Bologna, and I was invited as a journalist to come and be part of it. And it was just unbelievably fabulous. But while I was there, I met a guy named Bill Rice, who was the food editor of the Chicago Tribune. And I don't know what I did, why he thought that I was interesting or worthy, but at the end of the trip, he pulled me aside and he goes, it's not public yet, but I'm about to move to New York and become the editor-in-chief of Food and Wine magazine. Come see me. And I'm like, whoa. I thought just being there with Marcella Hazan was like huge. And then I was going home with the possibility of a job interview. And I got the job, and I was called the culinary editor, and I was the liaison between the kitchen and all the recipe testing and all the chefs that came in from all over the world and the editorial part. So I went between both.
Wow. So now in the middle of all of this amazing food movement that's going on in the city, you end up, you're with this beautiful family, you met this handsome guy, right here.
Oh my goodness,
it's 1977.
That's the first week we met.
Yeah. So you meet John Rudolph. He's a journalist, and he's got his thing going on in the city. Why in the world would you both drop everything and move to Maine?
Well, there were a few steps before that. That was the week we met, and he was.
I like the long hair.
I like the beard.
It looks like you guys are digging into some cioppino there.
I think we were baking bread and making bouillabaisse. The first week, it was a hot summer romance, and it's been 40. I should know this. We've been together a long time, and it's a great love story.
So
But
tell us about it.
The first week we met, he had been a cook for the summer, one summer, and loved to cook. And his mother, the photographer, an amazing cook. She lived in Italy. So he really grew up in exactly the way that I did not describe I did. They had family meals, there was all kinds of homemade food, and they celebrated food. And we met, and it was like, we just cooked for a week. We cooked, and I mean, we still remember the black bass with the mustard caper sauce, the bread and the bouillabaisse. Okay, this is 40-something years ago, but I remember it all. And it was a hot summer romance that lasted a really long time. So he was living in Connecticut working for a radio station, and I was in New York working for the magazine. And John grew up in Manhattan, and his goal was to leave the city. But I said, come move to the city, let's try this. And he got a job at a radio station in New York, and eventually became the news editor of WNYC, and we lived in New York City. And then he announced, let's leave the city. And I'm like, no. I spent my whole childhood wanting nothing more than being a city girl.
Wow.
New York was like everything. It was sophistication. It was everything that I felt that I hadn't had as a child. And I loved it there. And he's like, let's just do it for a year. And Seattle was thrown out. And I'm like, it rains there. Have you ever been there? No. And then he said, Austin, Texas. I'm like, good music, good barbecue, but have you ever been there? I mean, he had been there once, and I'm like, and then Food and Wine sent me on an assignment to do a story called The Best Restaurants of the New England Coast. Great assignment. We're like, let's stretch this out over the whole summer. So we did the Connecticut coastline one weekend. Then we came up to Maine, and we were up in Camden and the Portland area, and we came down through New Hampshire. There used to be a place in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, called the Blue Strawberry. Does anybody know that place, that name? Oh, it was something. It was, 3 guys owned it, and it was a place that would be so on trend right now, today. And I didn't go unannounced. I mean, I called ahead and I said, I'm doing this story. We're coming to dinner, whatever, Thursday night. I'd love to interview you Friday morning. So they knew. So we had been eating, and I had never reviewed restaurants before, and I did not know how to do it. No one told me. So I'm like, John, let's order 5 appetizers. Let's get 4 main courses. We'll get 5 desserts. We'd been eating like this. We hit this place in Portsmouth, and I'm like, this is the place. This place, it was served family style. Everything was super creative and out of the box. And we had the first course, loved it. We had the second course, adored it. Then they served a sorbet, and the main course came. And John looks at me and he's like, I'm done. I'm going to be ill. And I'm like, oh, no, you're not. No. No one's going to be ill. We have to eat this meal. And the minute he said it, I was like, I can't eat anything, but I'm like, I'm a professional. So I tasted everything and I moved it around on the plate, and the waiter kept giving us these looks, and they kept not clearing our plate.
Did they know that you were there to write a story?
Oh, totally.
Oh, they knew.
Totally.
Okay. Yeah.
So
they probably sent you even more food.
The chef, Jim Haller, comes out of the kitchen, comes up to the table, puts his hand out, and he goes, I'm Jim Haller. Sorry you hated my food. And walks out of the restaurant. And I'm like, oh no, what do I do? What do I do?
What do you do?
John says, go get him, run after him. And I'm like, listen, I tell him the whole story. We've been eating, we love this is just, I love everything you're doing. Can I please come talk to you tomorrow? And he was like, well, okay. And we ended up becoming really good friends. And that summer, Labor Day weekend, it was hot as can be in New York City, and he called and he's like, we're having a picnic, why don't you guys come up and visit? And we're like, sure, that would be great. And we came up and we met all these people, and it was sort of the beginning of a love affair. As a child, I went to camp in Maine.
Oh, did
so
you?
To me, Maine was these dreamy, wonderful summers, and the smell of balsam and pine and lobsters and red hot dogs. And then here we were, and I was like, and John's like, why don't we try living here for a year? And I thought, that I could do. So it was like our year in Tuscany or our year in France, but it was our year in Maine. We sublet our apartment in New York City, and we got here in December, which was a major mistake. It's dark, it's cold, and everybody's at holiday parties and family functions. And
your family's in Westchester.
Our family was
Manhattan.
still in New York City, and we looked at each other and we're like, what are we doing?
Eat
What
lobster.
have we done?
Yeah.
That's exactly what we did.
Is that right?
Every time we had a crisis of like, why did we move here? We would go get a lobster. And then, we were like, it's so cheap compared to, and we would just keep eating lobsters. And by the time the year was up, it was really clear we weren't going back.
Wow.
And it happened, it's almost like salt air when you go to the ocean, the way it kind of slowly gets into your system and you absorb it, and all of a sudden you realize you look better, you feel better, you know, life is good. And we took to Maine in a big way.
Wow.
And we stayed.
So this was when you also got your first book contract, your first book ever, out of the 16. So did you leave your job at Food & Wine?
I did. So the deal was that I sent out a proposal for a book called, all based on that mustard article. My first book was called Condiments, and it was about the whole gourmet food trend, and one chapter was on olive oil, and one was on vinegars and mustards and hot sauces, and I got a contract, and as soon as I got the contract, I thought, I think I can leave the job. And I remember telling a few people, and they're like, don't do it. You're crazy. You have a great job. Why would you leave it? And I remember thinking of it being like the way that I left college after freshman year. It was like, there's nothing wrong with this place, but I feel the calling to do something different. And I left the job, and we came to Maine, and I wrote the book, and it led to, I felt that I could write in a way that was more focused than I would have been if I had stayed in New York. I don't know if that's true or not, since
because you were kind of in this bubble, almost like in a different bubble, not with all the noise in the city.
Yeah, as everybody knows, big cities are very chaotic, and they're also stimulating. And I found myself getting stimulated by taking walks in the woods and going to country auctions and eating lobster and meeting new people in our community.
So what was the food scene back then in Maine? And we're talking like 1982, right? When you had just gotten here.
Yeah, I think 84.
What was the
well, let's
farmers
just say,
markets where there's like all the farm
remember.
to table restaurants?
Yeah, right. No, not at all. I would say that this food scene that we have now in the state of Maine, you might not have even been able to imagine it back then. I don't remember farmers markets at all. Wow. I remember really struggling trying to find organic produce. You would go to a health food store. That was your only option. There were no organic foods in supermarkets. And health food store organic food was sad. There was the kale, limp.
Wow, they had kale then?
They did have kale then. Wow. The thing about the people in Maine is that they knew what was good for a long time. But there was always a commitment here, I think, to local foods before local food became a buzzword. The incredible bounty out of the sea, the farming has always been so impressive here. But farm to table, that didn't exist. It was such a different food scene. We used to go to church suppers to get really local food. We used to go to beanhole suppers to have a New England experience, because the restaurants, particularly in the southern part of the state where I live, were very generic. You'd open a menu and it would be filet mignon, lobster this, lobster that.
And you get your bread and your butter.
You get your coleslaw, and you know
potato.
what? It was all great.
Yeah.
But there wasn't a lot of variety. And it's been really incredible to watch it change. And there's so many key people in this state, and I'm so in awe of the chefs here, but maybe more so with the farmers, the commitment to just keeping heirloom varieties of beans and potatoes, and I think the food here is incredible.
I mean, just to go back to your point, there are now, I think, 30 winters farmers markets and 100 in the summer.
It's incredible.
It is incredible.
I can go to a farmer's
that.
Yeah, I can go to a farmer's market all winter long.
Wow.
Going to different towns, and then clearly in the summer they're all over the place, and the food is spectacular, and the people are spectacular. There's an essay in Notes from a Maine Kitchen about going to a farmer's market in February and the social scene there, and literally hundreds and hundreds of people come through.
Yeah, let's talk about this because this book is so soulful. It's just beautifully orchestrated. When you sent it to me, because I wanted to do some research, I said, okay, I'll read a couple of pages, and I'll get started on it, and I literally could not put the book down. I started in January because it starts January through December, and what I love what you did with it was you sort of took the bounty of that month and you highlighted it. And you started this book as a blog, right, for Down East magazines?
Oh, actually, that's true. Yeah,
was
I
that
forgot
right?
about
See,
that.
I do know.
I know, I'm telling you. I'm going to call you in the middle of the night and say, what year did I get married? I know how old my kids are.
Yes. We're going to get to your kids too. But what I loved about this book was that, you started with the smelts and then you went into February with the winter's markets. And then March was all the maple madness. And tell us a story about you and John, and quickly recap for us what John does in March.
Oh, so we live in an old farmhouse, and we have not very many, but we have a spectacular, very old maple tree right in front of the house, and then there's a bunch on the property, and he's out there making his maple syrup every year. I mean, we haven't done it that much in the past few years, but it's so beautiful to. At first I thought, I write in the essay, it's 2 a.m., I wake up in the middle of the night, where is my husband? And he is in the barn, sitting there, watching the sap evaporate at this incredibly slow, he's a much more patient human being than I am, and I'm like, I'd put on my down jacket, put the boots on over my pajamas, and go out there, and I'm like, what are you doing? And he just looked so happy. He just loves to do that. And it is kind of like liquid gold. I mean, that first batch of maple syrup that you get is such a beautiful taste and color, and to know that, he guided over it and spent all those sleepless nights out there. So happy, though. I'm like, I think you're just doing this so you don't have to get up with the kids in the morning.
So how in the world did you meet Jim Stott and Jonathan King from Stonewall Kitchen? Tell us that story, because that was quite a crazy year in your life. You wrote 6 cookbooks with them.
I did. Well,
how did that happen?
So it's actually interesting. They are among the first people that we met when we moved to Maine.
Really?
One of the owners of the Blue Strawberry that I just talked about was a guy named Gene Brown, and he threw some really great parties. And we met these 2 guys there, Jim and Jonathan. And the next year there they were. And I remember them telling me that they were, there's my family.
Oh, there's your beautiful. We're going to talk about them for sure. I want to talk
I
about
remember Jim and Jonathan saying, we started making jellies and we're selling them at the farmer's market. Do you think we could have a business? And I just want to come clean and say that if you ever want to start a business, come talk to me, because if I tell you it's a terrible idea, go with it. I mean, these guys, they're like, yeah, we're making these jams and jellies and we're thinking of starting a business. I'm like, I don't think so. Everybody makes jams and jellies, and how are you going to, well, Stonewall Kitchen is a legacy. I'm serious. I mean, I remember them also telling me, we're going to start a cooking school. And I'm like, in York, Maine? And I'm like, who would run it? Well, we're just going to train someone and send her to cooking school. And then and I'm like, this is a disaster. Well, it's a hugely successful.
Well, they celebrated 10 years last year, and
right?
we actually both teach there, which is so funny.
I know, and I have to come to one of your classes because I hear they're wonderful.
Oh,
anyway,
you.
So I've known Jim and Jonathan for years, and they all, once the business took off, they said, we want to write a cookbook, would you write it? And I said, I don't ghost write. If you want to write it with me and put my name on the book, let's talk. And they're like, no, we just want our name on the book. And I gave them some other names, good luck. And then we re-met a few years later and they're like, okay, we're ready, let's write some books.
And you wrote 6 books.
First I wrote that one, Stonewall Kitchen Harvest, which I really love that book. So we would sit down and they would talk through ideas and throw things out, and then I would go home and cook for a year and write and keep it within the spirit of their style, their philosophy, and try to write it in the we voice. And they were fabulous to work with. Jim is a very talented photographer. The photography is beautiful.
Oh, wow.
So I wrote
I didn't know he photographed.
Harvest and then Favorites. And then we got a contract to write 4 books, single subject books, grilling, appetizers, winter celebrations, and grilling, I think.
Yeah,
Did I
you said that,
Anyway.
So how did you get 6 books done in a year? That's a lot.
Well, the first 2 were not part of that year, but the 4 books were. And I was on a roll. I did the first one, bam, bam, bam. I did the second one, bam, bam, bam. I did the third one, bam, bam. And then the 4th one was due, and I think I had a month left. And I remember I woke up one morning and I said to John, I'm done. I don't have a single idea left.
And John probably had to try all these recipes out.
Oh, he eats everything. I thought, I'm going to give the money back. And I'm going to say, sorry, it was too much. I mean, I felt completely depleted. Like, I think about food all the time. I have had dreams that have created recipes. Food is just everywhere in my conscience. And there was nothing. I'm like, I just want toast. I don't want to think about this. And John, who is quite smart, said to me, just let it go for 24 hours. Don't think about it. Don't pressure yourself. And I'm like, nothing's going to change. And I really did that. I remember I took this incredibly long hike, and the next day I woke up, and I think the last one was appetizers, and I thought, ooh, wouldn't it be cool if you took, and there I was. I was just going again. Like,
you just needed to walk away from it for
I
24
needed
hours.
to express defeat. And then somehow the energy re-emerged and I got them done. And I actually think the last one was the best one. I'm not quite sure what that means, but I think sort of hitting rock bottom and then rising up again got my creative juices going. But it's 16 cookbooks, it's not easy to... now there's the internet. If you want a recipe for the weirdest thing, chicken livers and pears on crostini, you can Google that and get 48 recipes. Sure. There's nothing left that hasn't been done. And yet, there's like this calling for me to just constantly, every time I go to a farmer's market, every time I go to a restaurant, sometimes I'll be reading a novel and there'll be a meal described, and I'll think, oh, that's so interesting. I never thought to put pears with a roast chicken. So this inspiration comes from the strangest places.
So I think that's very cool, because when you told me that you were the resident chef at WBUR, I'm sitting here thinking, how in the world is she cooking live on a radio show? How could she be a resident chef on a radio show? How does this work? And so I was very curious, so that's why I told Kathy, I said, would it be okay if I came and shadowed you for the day, right? So here you are now at WBUR. This is 2000. How do you get this gig in radio where you end up doing, a cooking segment on an award-winning show? I know you sort of transitioned into WBR, but how did you get to that spot? Because it's a really neat role in food. It's food writing, but you're also cooking, and you're talking about it on air.
Yeah. So Here and Now started at WBUR, about 20 years ago, and we heard that they were going to start this news show there. And John's like, you should call them. Maybe they do a food segment. I'm like, they're not going to do food on a news show. But I called, and I went in and I talked, and they said, what would you want to do? And I said, well, what I'd really like to do is cook in real time. And they're like, well, how would that work? And there's a there, in the old studios, there used to be a kitchen, and it's essentially the staff cafeteria.
Can we talk about that for a second?
Yeah.
Okay, so I go into the staff cafeteria.
But this is the old one. It was worse.
And there was nobody in there. Maybe one person heating up their lunch or whatever, like really early. We got there at 11 because, you know, she's a lead foot, so we got there early. But it was almost like a memo went out that KG's in the house because everyone came out of the woodwork. Like, people I didn't even know worked that. I was like, wow, where is everybody coming from?
Well, it's their lunchtime.
I know it was their lunchtime, but it was KG time. Like, you were in the house, in that kitchen, and they wanted to know what you brought. Free food, Kathy's food. They got into all her stuff. There she's on air, going live. That was very cool to listen to you do that. And I got to tell you, I've never heard anybody spew more facts about sweet potatoes and varietals of apples and talk about all these recipes on air as smoothly as you did without really even taking a breath, because you're on air, right? You're on radio. So you
but I've also been doing it for a long time.
Well, you're a pro. I
So
can tell.
yeah, I was going to say, so they let me cook live in the beginning. Wow. So the show would start, the host would be in the studio, and then they would literally run into the kitchen, and I would cook something in real time, the beginning of it. So this is top of the show. But I always cooked things that were sound heavy. So I didn't make pasta because boiling water is very boring. Right. Chopping of things or sizzling in a hot skillet where you get the oil really hot. I was constantly thinking of dishes that had sound because I thought, how do you make food come to life when all you're doing is hearing it, right? So much of what we think about with food is looking at the gorgeous color photos or on TV. Everything is spectacular, the table's perfect, the kitchen's clean. But on radio, it's just, the reason I love it is that it's just about storytelling.
Right.
So I wanted to include this sound element. So I would start a dish, and then they'd go through the gruesome news of the day, and then they'd come back at the end of it was just an hour then, at the end of the hour, and I would finish the dish in real time. That's and great. Then the Iraq War broke out, and it was determined that it was just too, I want to say dissonant to have sort of live cooking with all this news, and there wasn't enough time, and it was too awkward getting the hosts in and out of the kitchen. So then it became that I was simply talking about food. But again, I wanted to bring it to life. So how do you talk about food where you're in your car or you're at home, you're sitting in your office, NPR's on in the background, but you get hungry and you want to cook what I'm talking about. That's always my goal. I want to get you to turn that car around, go to the store, buy those ingredients, and go home and make it. So if I can be excited about it and make it sound approachable, then I'm super happy.
And you did make the program host very happy, because here we're talking about all the sweet potatoes, and there's that miso.
Oh, that was good.
Mayo that was so to die for good. And there's the pork and apples, and you talked about all the varietal of apples and the leeks. I mean, all of the stuff, I can smell it right now because I was in that kitchen with you. And there's that delicious apple salad with the roasted sauteed mushrooms that you made. Remember how good that was with pecans? It was really good. And there's Jeremy Hobson.
Yep, he's the host.
Who would not put a sweet potato in his mouth. And what did you end up doing? You converted him.
Well, that was the goal of the day. Just the night before I'm coming in. Yeah. So before I do a segment, I do a lot of research about the topic, and then I create 3 recipes for each radio show. And I had my 3 recipes done. I had them all prepped. I was ready to go to Boston. And I get an email from my producer going, oh no, it turns out Jeremy hates sweet potatoes. And I'm like, we'll see about that. And Jeremy is obsessed with tacos. So I'm like, I'm gonna do a sweet potato taco. Yes, and we kind of converted him.
You did convert him because
what did he keep saying? It's too sweet. I'm like, it's called a sweet potato.
Yes. But he liked the miso. He liked that. He enjoyed that a lot. Now, let's talk a little bit about 2010. You got an email, you got a phone call from the White House.
Yes, I did. I got an email from an organization that I belong to called the IACP, the International Association of Culinary Professionals, saying, does anybody want to attend an event at the White House? I'm like, does anyone want to attend? Michelle Obama will be there. And I think I answered that email in less than a second. I'm like, I'm in, but it was supposed to be a gathering of chefs. And I do not consider myself a chef.
Why? Why don't you consider yourself a chef? I mean, you've written 16 cookbooks because you don't manage a team?
Well, I don't work in a restaurant. I don't cook professionally for people coming in. I consider myself a very accomplished home cook. And I think it served me well to, it's just a title, right? But that feels more reflective of my philosophy, that a chef makes fancy food. And I want to make the food that you want to eat on your best day. That's really what I'm interested in.
Or on my absolute worst day when I really need some good food.
No, I mean your best day as a cook.
Right.
That this is you, at your best. And I try to be realistic about it. I don't think a chef is really that interested in Tuesday night at your house with 2 kids that need to be fed and soccer games and theater practice, right? I mean, a chef is about making the stock from scratch and then adding 2 pounds of butter, but not always. People constantly call me chef, and I always laugh and I say, I'm not a chef, but they're like, of course you are. I cooked at the Beard House, and it was like, they kept saying, chef, where do you want this, chef? And I kept looking
for the chef.
Who's the chef? Where's the chef?
So you go to the White House.
Oh, right, the White House.
So you don't consider yourself a chef, but within a second you had said, yep, I'm in.
So there were 1,000 of us, and we march into the Rose Garden.
Oh, wow.
The Rose Garden. But they're all wearing their starched whites and their toques on their head, and I'm wearing, a black sweater and blue jeans. It's boiling hot. It's a June afternoon. And we sit down, and Michelle Obama comes out, and I had chills. It was about 102 degrees.
Oh, my gosh.
And the message was, this was the beginning of her Let's Move initiative, where she wanted to try to attack childhood obesity. And the message was, all of you out there, you chefs, are in the most powerful position to change the way that families eat. And she said, if each one of you goes home and tries to teach children how to cook healthy foods, you could change this country for the better. And we clapped, and we applauded, and we took selfies in the Rose Garden. And I got on the plane to come home, and it was really like one of those cartoons, with the devil on one side and the angel on the other. And the angel said, you have to do this, Kathy. You have to do what she said. And the devil said, leave her alone. She's a journalist, she's got assignments, she's got books to write. I went as a journalist. I didn't go as a chef. I had no intent, I don't have a restaurant, I didn't have a platform. And she said, when you get home, call a local school or call an organization that you respect or that you know about, and see if you can go in and teach those kids something. So these 2 little characters played it out the whole way home. And when I got back, I thought, okay, I'm going to call the principal of the elementary school that both our daughters went to. And Michelle Obama also said, everyone will say no. They'll say there's no money, there's no resources, and you have to persevere. And I'm like, this is perfect. They'll all say no. There won't be any money. I've done my thing. I can quiet these little characters. So I call her, and I say, hi, it's a wonderful principal named Vicki Stewart. And I said, I was just at the White House. She starts hyperventilating. And I tell her about Michelle Obama's initiative, and this is what she wants to do, and I know it's impossible, and I know there's no money, but I just wanted to tell you about it. And there's complete silence. And then she says, just like this, I will do anything to make this happen. And I'm like, shit. So for 5 years, we started a program at Central School, which is pre-K through 3rd grade. We built a hoop house, and together with a lot of parent volunteers.
Wow,
And
look at
that's
that
what
landscape.
we transformed the
Amazing.
backyard of the public school. It used to just be these really beat up soccer fields. This terrific landscape architect from town, Terrence Parker, redesigned the whole thing. He made an amphitheater, fruit orchards, and here are the kids building the soil up for our hoop house. And we started teaching, I started teaching cooking classes. I brought in local chefs, and these kids raised food, and they learned that kale chips were almost as good as potato chips. And no matter what we put in front of them, they ate it because they planted the seed, they watered the seed, they grew the food, and then they cooked it. And even the pickiest kid was in. And it was incredibly
they owned
rewarding.
it, right?
They
were
owned
owning
it.
that.
That's exactly it. That's exactly
It's
it.
their bounty. It's
Yeah.
their feast. And
really-
not mom and dad putting it on the plate.
Exactly. I
right?
mean, mothers would come and volunteer, and I've told this story before, but there was one woman who pulled me aside, and she's like, "See that little boy over there?" And I'm like, "Yeah." She's like, "That's my Tommy. I don't want you to be insulted. He doesn't eat anything. He won't go near fruits and vegetables." And then at the end of the hour of the cooking class, I would see that woman wiping away a tear. And I said, "Are you okay?" And she's like, "I don't understand it. He's eating it." And I said the same thing to her that I just said. He planted it with his friends, and he watered it, and he owns it, and he cooked it. How's he not going to eat it?
He's at least going to give it a shot. And then he found out he
And that's all I ever ask the kids.
Right.
Just taste it.
Wow.
Just taste it. And I am most proud to say that this program still exists.
That's amazing.
And I am only there once or twice a year. So my goal always was that it could have its own life, and it does.
Wow. What a legacy. And so TED Talks, they reached out to you and they asked you to do a talk.
Yeah, so I got to give a
From the ground
TEDx
up.
talk in Portsmouth, New Hampshire several years ago about this whole journey from, you guys pretty much just heard an abridged version of the
amazing.
TED Talk.
Wow.
It was a thrill.
What a hallmark year for you. So that was 2014, and that was also the year you won your first James Beard Award
My
for.
first and only. I hope Rage
I
Bake.
think it's the first of many to come, but
Yeah, it was
'cause
quite a year.
that's a great book. That's going to be nominated for a JB. I have this feeling, but I mean, you won that James Beard Award not for a book, but you won it for an absolutely brilliant article on cabbage. of all
Yeah,
things. It was called Cabbage Craft.
It was called Cabbage Craft. It was the very first year they gave out, so they have food journalism awards, and it was the first year they gave out an award for a brand new category called home cooking. So you've heard me just say I'm not a chef. So I was so thrilled to receive it for that category.
Yeah, I can see you got a big smile on your face right
Oh,
there.
I
Yeah,
have a
that's the one.
ridiculous smile. I was so happy. That's when I was trying to grow my hair out. That was not a good look. But yeah, it was an article for Eating Well magazine. And I was so flabbergasted when they called my name that I didn't stand up. And my friend was like, "You won, get up, get up." And I'm walking up to this stage, everybody in the food world is there, and I'm thinking, I never thought this was going to happen. And when, you know how people go, "Oh, I don't have a speech," and then they pull this long piece of, I did not have a speech. Luckily I was sitting way in the back, and on the walk up, I just remember saying to myself, "Say something real. Say something real."
What did you say?
So I wrote this article, and I handed it in, and the recipes were great, and I wrote an intro, and the editor called me, and he said, "I don't mean to be invasive, but I know that you had cancer last year, and I know that cabbage is one of the foods that is supposed to be the best for cancer, and would you be willing to write a little bit about your journey with that?" And I said, "No." I just had this quick response. I'm like, "Cancer's private. I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to mix it with food writing." And then he goes, "Just think about it." He was really smart. He didn't push. He's, "Just think about it." And I was ranting and raving to John. I'm like, "Can you believe this? I'm not writing about that." And again, a good night's sleep, and woke up the next morning and just sat down, and I remember thinking, well, I could just see what happens. And I started telling a truer story. And then I won. So
The truth always wins. They say that. It sounds cliche, but it's true.
The cliches often are true.
That's why they're all around.
That's why they're on T-shirts.
But I mean, I know you didn't write the article thinking you were going to win a JBA, but
Oh, no
how did
way.
that change your life as a writer? Did you feel like you had more validation all of a sudden as a writer, or did it lead into more cookbooks, or did you feel like you now were able to say,
I mean, it's an incredible honor and it's an incredible title to always be able to write your bio as Kathy Gunst is a James Beard Award-winning food journalist. But honestly, I don't think I got any more work because of it. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think so. I think what happened for me is, and I think this happens for a lot of women in particular, is that I never trusted my voice. I always second-guessed it. I used to always make sure that John read everything before I handed it in. And can you edit this? And, I never fully believed in my power as a writer to own the page, to own the words, and to trust that my voice was my voice and that there was no other way to write. And I think my writing changed a lot after that award.
So you did have a shift.
I definitely had a shift. I think it took some time before I realized I could link it to that. But, you see it with young children. If you recognize something they do, they shine. And honestly, we're not that different. Somebody says, hey, nice job, and throws that necklace around your neck, and you are standing taller. And then you have to look in the mirror the next day and say, you know what, maybe I am a writer. Maybe I don't need to run this by my husband anymore. And that was a big shift. I stopped doing that.
Really?
I started handing things in because I had edited it and I had looked at it. And I said, is my voice authentic here? I do a lot of classes teaching people to do food writing. I've been working on a memoir writing. And that's always the most important thing is voice. Is your voice yours? Because otherwise we all write the same book, whether it's fiction or rage baking or notes
45 articles on mustard.
Exactly.
This was your article on
How
mustard.
do you make what you do yours? And it's really about trusting that authentic voice. So that was maybe the biggest gift of that award.
Was validation and your own validation, really.
Exactly.
Yeah. So speaking about, validation, I know that food insecurity is very close to your heart. And you recently partnered with Hannaford on a very big promotion. And you were, again, one of the only female chefs in this lineup for Chef's Table. Because Carrie was here, and we saw your picture up there, and we're like, wow, Kathy's the only female chef up there.
Yeah, it's me and Carrie Altiero and a guy named Rick Orlando from upstate New York. And
there you are at the Damerscotta Hannaford in the
wow, I haven't
produce aisle.
seen
And I
that.
took a photo of you.
I didn't go into the grocery store for the whole month. My brother sent me a picture, and he's like, you're kind of tall in Hannaford. And I'm like, I don't want to see this. I teamed up with them because I really believe in what they're doing. They just started a program where they gave $1 million to New England schools to start food pantries in the schools so that kids on the weekend could go home with food. And it's not that often that you see a corporation that puts their money where their mouth is.
Yeah, that's true. I know that you're a big fan of soup.
Yes.
So tell us about Soup Swap, because that's your next book that came out after Notes from My Maine Kitchen. Before Rage Baking. What brought Soup Swap on? How did that sort of build up inside of you where you were like, I'm going to write 45 soup recipes and I have to write a book, or maybe even more, yes?
Actually, it was a friend that lives down the street, and she called early one winter, this is many years ago now, and she's like, how about we do a soup swap? And I'm like, what? I hadn't heard of it. And she's like, we could get like 4 or 5 couples together. We meet at one person's house, they make salad, dessert, wine. Everybody brings a big pot of soup, and then we bring our mason jars and our yogurt containers, and we all go home with all these leftovers. And my first reaction was, oh dear God, another potluck. This is the thing about Maine. There are a lot of potlucks. Have you noticed? And the thing about potlucks is they're great when people are into doing it and they like to cook. But when we first moved here, we went to a potluck wedding. and there were 23 taboolies.
A potluck wedding. Wow,
Oh, yeah,
never heard of
that was
before.
another time, another place. So when she first proposed this to me, I thought, I don't want to do that. But then I started thinking about it. You cook once, and you go home with 10 meals.
How's that?
Because everybody brings a pot of soup. You have a party, and then you go home with all 10 soups left over. So you can put half of them in your freezer. You can eat them that week for lunch, for dinner. But, you know, in the middle of the winter, there in your freezer are all these gorgeous homemade soups. So I thought, let's do this.
That's a great idea. And you didn't have to make all 10 soups. You made one soup.
Well, you cook once and it multiplies. So we started doing it, and it was so much fun. And it was so good. And it was super interesting because there were, I think, 5 couples, maybe 6 when we first started. And at first the soups were pedestrian, okay? Being kind. There was what you would expect. There was a chicken noodle, there was a tomato soup, maybe there was like a minestrone. And as we would meet once a month, all winter long at a different person's home. But we did this for at least 5 or 6 years. And as the time went on, everybody's game went way up. We sort of became possessed by soup. If someone was going on a vacation, instead of bringing home T-shirts or spices, they would bring home soup recipes for us. And they would bring that to the next soup swap. And I started getting so into the soup, and I thought, why not a book? And I have heard from people all over the country who are doing this. And the other thing about it, and I think in many ways it set the stage for Rage Baking, is really about building community. People have soup swaps with churches and synagogues, book clubs, ski clubs, neighborhoods, family members. You can do it with 2 people, and you can do it with 20 people.
Right.
And I toured around the country, and we had soup swaps in all kinds of places. And the other thing about soup and living in a climate like this is that it is so comforting, but it is also really healthy for the most part. If you're not living on cream and butter soups are just from all over the world, and
It's a great way to have an international experience at one table.
exactly.
Truly is, because I saw a recipe in here that I really wanted you to tell us more about. I love the fall soup. I thought that was perfect for this time of year, you know, but
Oh, the roasted fall. Yeah, I love that.
I love that Greek soup.
Avgo lemono.
Yum.
Yes,
So-
with orzo and
So we're
lemon.
coming up on Thanksgiving next week, right?
We
So
are?
We are, Kathy.
I have
Take
to
a
do
deep
a radio
breath.
show on Monday
Take a deep breath.
answering all these questions about, guess what, Thanksgiving.
So how about turkey? So what can we do with some leftover turkey after Thanksgiving? Give us
Honestly,
some
it's
neat ideas.
the best part about roasting a turkey is that what I do is I usually just freeze half the leftovers, because after the sandwich at midnight and the leftovers in a few days, I just don't want to see it.
Right.
But the carcass, that beautiful turkey carcass, makes the most incredible turkey stock. And then you can make a turkey avgo lemono with orzo and lemon. It's thick and comforting. You can make, I mean, you can use it the way that you would use chicken stock, but it's got actually a lot of interesting flavor. You can use it in all kinds of ways.
I just loved how you had just about every soup recipe in here, and every protein, and there was vegan and vegetarian.
Oh, the mulligatawny.
Mulligatawny.
I love that.
It spoke to me because I'm Indian, and I loved the coconut milk and the garam masala and the toasting of the spices, and then
Yeah.
your whole face is on fire as you're eating it and you feel alive. That was great. But
I love that.
But I just think this was a wonderful idea, and it's so relatable, and every recipe in here is it just feels accessible. It doesn't feel like it's out of reach. And you're right, you are an expert home chef, cook, whatever you want to call yourself. I just think it's a brilliant book.
Well, and if a cookbook can help
healthy.
build community, then that's even better. And a lot of people have sent me their recipes. I keep thinking maybe there'll be a soup swap too. Who knows? There's so many soups that didn't make it that I love.
So we should have a party here. We should talk to Andrew about having a party here, a big soup swap.
Oh, wouldn't
right?
that be fun? A Lincoln
Theater soup swap.
Yeah, all we need
Yeah.
are some hot plates.
We just need hot plates and a whole bunch of hungry people, and
Well,
a lot
that's
of
easy,
and
yeah.
a lot of good vegetables, and we're good to go.
Absolutely.
So, Kathy, I know that you've written 16 cookbooks. do you feel like you've written yourself out? Do you think after Rage Baking what do you think you haven't written about yet that you would love to dig into?
That's such a good question, and I don't know the answer. Shifting out of sort of more traditional cookbooks to this bit of activism and bringing all these women together, I don't know what's next. I am working on a memoir. It is slower than, I've been doing it for so many years now, but I think I really want to finish it. I hope it gets out into the world, but I would like to finish that. I don't know food-wise what the next book will be. I don't have a clue, which is kind of exciting.
Just let the universe kind of bring it to you,
yeah,
right?
I want
Kinda
this
like the phone
baby
call.
to be launched, and I'm looking forward to getting out and traveling and spreading the word, and we'll see.
You have a big book tour in February, I'm sure, to promote it.
Yeah, so it's going to be exciting to see how it's received. And, you know, the only hesitation I have about the political aspect of this is that I'm so concerned with how alienate's not the right word, how divisive this country is right now. I feel like the people are here and the people are here, and there's nobody in the middle anymore. And I want so badly to be able to talk to everybody. And I'm angry. I am angry. There's no doubt about it. But I also would love to think that maybe baking could bridge some conversations. We'll see.
I think you've covered it. You've covered the soup. You brought people together with that. I think the baking is definitely going to fire things up, whether it's their ovens or their spirits, you know, or they're just punching at the dough. I think it's great. I think you know how to creatively speak to an issue, whether it's political or it's communal or whatever it is. And what I loved about Notes from My Maine Kitchen, and I truly hope you guys, if you don't know a copy of this, you buy it. The November essay was just very moving to me, and it was about giving thanks. And it was about this experience you had in your daughter's school. So we skipped by that slide, but Maya and Emma are such a big part of your life. You're beautiful girls, and you devote a lot of time volunteering at their school when they were growing up.
When they were kids,
Tell us the story about the one little child.
I went in early one morning, I feel like it was first grade, and the teacher said, "Oh, good, you're here to volunteer. Can you help me out? I have this one girl who's just out of control." And I'm like, "Sure, what do you want me to do?" And she's like, "Just sit with her, be with her." And she was raging. And I finally got her to calm down enough, and I said, "What's going on? Like, what's the matter?" And she was crying, and she just looked at me, and she goes, "I'm hungry." Oh. And I said, "You're what?" It didn't occur to me that in my own community, there were children that weren't being fed enough. And she's like, "My mom said we can't get food until 2 more days." And I'm like, "I'll be right back." And I burst into tears. And I grabbed the teacher, and I'm like, "Well, I found out what's going on. How can we fix this?" I said, "I'm going to grab my kids' lunch right now, and can I leave and go get this kid some food to bring home?" And the school was really reactive in a very positive way. But for me, it was like, oh, hunger happens elsewhere. Hunger happens in other countries, or hunger happens in very poor urban areas. But in my small Maine town, there it was, looking me in the face. And so I wrote that essay because it was a big moment. It was a huge eye-opener.
And it inspired you to, you did the outdoor program for the kids with the garden later on. It kind of came through. But you also decided to go volunteer time at the soup kitchen around Thanksgiving, and there was this really wonderful story about your s'more mac and cheese. Tell us more about that.
For many years we worked at a soup kitchen, and it was right before Thanksgiving, and they would often, I'd get there. The first few times I went, they're like, "Okay, there's the mashed potatoes," and I'm like, "What do you mean?" They'd open a cabinet and there'd be a box. So at the end of the first time, I said, "Could I bring the food next time?" And they're like, "You're going to pay for it?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I would like to do that." And maybe 100 people show up. I wasn't going to make them, I was going to make them a meal that I would make you, right? But there's no way I'd serve you mashed potatoes from a box. So I thought, I'm going to make macaroni and cheese. And I made a beautiful sauce with 3 types of cheese. And the whole thing was from scratch. And this guy, kind of bedraggled, came up to the window and he goes, "Who cooked this?" And I'm like, "Oh boy, here we go." And he's like, "I want to know who cooked this." And I'm like, "Come on, own it, Kathy." And I'm like, "I did. Is there a problem?" And he goes, "Yeah, there's a problem. It's got s'more." And I go, "Excuse me?" And he goes, "It's got s'more." And I said, "I'm sorry, sir. I don't know what you're saying." And he goes, "It's got s'more. I want some more, some more, some more." And of course, I started crying. And I thought, this is what it's all about, you know? Mm-hmm. This guy was moved enough to come up and thank me that way. And he got me laughing and crying, and yeah.
Wow, what a gift. This book is such a gift. To me, I feel like, you say this is your love story and your love letter to the state of Maine, and I think this is your diatribe to the country, rage baking. But thank you so much for being here with us today. We're not done yet because we do have a few minutes and we want to make sure that we can open the floor for some questions if you're okay with that. So, anyone here have any questions for Kathy this evening? We'd love to include you.
You can ask me almost anything.
Yes.
Quiet group.
Question.
Yeah.
What do you order when you go out to a restaurant?
I tend to order. What do I order? I tend to not order things that I'm making a lot at home, but I'm not quite sure how to qualify that. I like to order fish because I'm really interested, particularly if I know a place is, good at getting locally sourced fresh fish. I always like to order soup because I'm endlessly fascinated. I mean, that's the thing about soup is that you can make up 100 new soups in a week. There's no limit to it. I also really like asking people, what shouldn't I miss here? And you have to trust whoever you're talking to at that point. But I find I'm often steered in the right direction. I just can't believe how many good restaurants there are in Maine now. The Portland area is just so on the map, and there's so many places I haven't tried yet. I will say that as I have gotten older, I've become less interested in going out, which is odd to me because most people say the opposite. When my kids were little, I had to cook every single night, and all I dreamt of was going out to dinner. And now I just feel like because I can go to farmers markets and get such good resources that I just want to stay home and play with the stuff and cook with it. And I'm always creating recipes for work. But when restaurant food is good, it's a real gift. Kathy, and it also gives me a lot of ideas. I like that. I like to go out to dinner to think, wow, I never would have thought of that.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I wanted to add to that great question was, do you think there's been a sort of a renaissance with the restaurants and food scene in Maine in the last decade? You've been here since 1982, but what do you think you've seen?
Huge.
I mean, not just in Portland, but we've got Rockland, we've got...
it's just everywhere. It's just incredible. I mean, you used to have to really search, to find a good restaurant out of maybe Portland. I mean, there were always the favorites, but it's really changed so much. I think that Portland, Maine is known for its food now nationwide. I mean, you pick up food magazines and every June and July, there it is. The other Portland, they call us, It's like, no, they're the other Portland. But it's pretty much becoming nationally known how good the food is here.
I mean, we did get voted, Portland got voted, most foodie city in 2018 at Bon Appetit.
Oh yeah, and so many Portland and Maine chefs have been nominated and awarded James Beard Awards. Right. Someone like Sam Hayward at 4th Street, who's been such a champion of local food and keeping farmers and fishermen. And that restaurant that is just, like people say, would you ever open a restaurant? I'm like, no, I wouldn't. But if I did, I'd want it to be 4th Street. That is the most perfect restaurant to me. It's like rustic, but it's fancy, and they're cooking in the open, and there's all that fire, and everything is local, and it's just like, it's just everything that a restaurant should be to me. But he's done so much for this state.
I loved your article on smelts with him in Notes
Oh,
from
I
My
got to
Kitchen.
go smelt fishing with Sam
It's
Hayward.
the January article you wrote in here, and it's fantastic. And just what you guys did with the smelts when you came back and cleaned them out and just put some cornmeal, and there's Sam Hayward just doing his thing in this little cabin or wherever you guys are.
It's
and
a hut.
Just like
Yeah.
amazing. I could taste it, just what he was doing
It was
with
a complete thrill. We caught hundreds of smelts, and yeah, it freaked me out driving across ice to a little hut where I went to Kittery Trading Post and bought Antarctic gloves, and I had layers and layers of stuff on, and we get into this little hut, and it's a freezing cold day, and there's a wood stove on, and it's about 70 degrees in there, and I'm just like, I loved it. I loved everything about it.
This is a fantastic book. I really hope you get a lot of, joy and pleasure about sort of
I loved this book. Is
passing
going
this book on.
to come out in paperback next year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we're very, very happy to be here today, not just to do the talk, but also do a book signing and maybe chat it up with a few guests here tonight who are dying to talk with you.
I also wanted to let you know, since I've been talking it up, that since Rage Baking is not coming out until February, I have stickers that book plates that I'm happy to autograph if you wanted to give it as a gift for the holidays and perhaps make a contribution to a candidate you believe in or an organization you believe in. You would have a holiday gift, and then it'll arrive the beginning of February.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
I can't wait. I mean, I'm taking this copy home because you sent me the galleys. I'm sitting here on my computer reading the galleys, which is basically before it goes to press, right?
Right.
And I'm thinking to myself, this is a jip job. I want the real deal. I want the book in my hand.
Well, this is not
and
the
I
color
want it.
book, but you'll get to see it.
But I can't wait to get a hold of it. So
Yeah.
thank you so much,
Thank
Kathy.
you.
It's been such a
Thank
joy
you. Thank
getting
you.
to know you
Thanks
and
for coming.
sharing your story. You're amazing.